Okay, greetings everybody. I'm Marguerite Rigoglioso of Seven Sisters Mystery School, and I'm here with Den Poitras, who is a wonderful, brilliant artist. We have an accompanying video where we took you through some of his remaining art in his gallery, the things that have not yet sold. And he's also an author of a book called Parthenogenesis. And tell me the subtitle again.
Right, yeah, Parthenogenesis, women's long-lost ability to self-conceive,
Yeah.
question mark.
Yeah, humbly put. And Den contacted me when you had written the article version,
Right.
which has now kind of been around the world many, many times.
It has.
And then because I had written the book Divine Birth in Ancient Greece, the Cult of Divine Birth in Ancient Greece, and then my second one, Virgin Mother Goddesses of Antiquity.
Right.
So what was your impression when you located that material?
Exactly. Well, I had chills over my whole body and tears in my eyes. It was just before I launched the article, I wanted to get one more search off of Google about Parthenogenesis, and your interview came up. It was an hour and a half long, and it was about your book, your first book, The Cult of Divine Birth in Ancient Greece. And I just couldn't believe what I saw and heard. And because at that point it had been 40 years that I basically had been alone with whatever information I had gathered, including a very personal story about a woman that was 6 feet 2 inches tall that had fasted without solid food for 2.5 years and conceived and delivered a baby. And so, anyway, it's in my book.
Yeah, because she had self-conceived.
Right.
And she had not necessarily planned or known even really what was happening to her. And that is a very, very compelling story that you write about. And unfortunately, the child was born with some issues, and then it died 3 months later.
Right.
But you have been a really outspoken advocate for the possibility of women to self-conceive. Now, when we're talking about this, we're not talking about something to do away with men or leave out men. We're talking about what appears to be emerging as an alternative reproductive possibility for women. This is talked about in various ancient cultures. I think in Melanesia, there's a culture that talks about there being, two different ways. And Delbert Blair, who really is an extraordinary researcher, an African-American man who crossed over a while ago, he was really onto this. And I think he was had an encyclopedic mind. He'd probably done a lot of this research. And he was a firm advocate for the fact that women could either self-conceive or they could conceive through a man. So, again, this is not to create a gender war or anything like that. It's simply to show us what are the other possibilities for women's conception and why might they be used, under what circumstances. I want to go into this a little bit more with you, Den, because you really, I found in the course of my research, I found a lot of the pieces that you use in your book as well, but you really put them together cross-culturally.
Right.
And let's have you talk a little bit about what is the highlight here? What do women need to know about this? Why has this been done over the planet for all these years?
Right. I found a very clear answer to that. I was given a book to review for a monthly periodical called Many Smokes Magazine, way back in the early 1970s. And they asked me, because of our magazine, different publishers would send books for us to review. And they said, Dennis, can you review this one and do a write-up on it? I said, okay. And it was about the Ojibwa people, or the Chippewa. If you say Ojibwa, If you say Ojibwa enough times in a row, it's going to sound like Chippewa, which is how they ended up sounding like, but it's the Ojibwa. And of course, it probably means the people. But this man that wrote the book spent about 10 years among the Ojibwa and different branches of it, trying to find stories, any kind of story that existed before the coming of the white man. And, he talks about how he gained their trust, of the elders, etc., etc. And then I'm starting to read this story about a ceremony regarding being on the lookout for certain young maidens that showed signs of grace, intelligence, compassion, empathy, whatever. And they would approach her and ask her if she would like to participate in an ancient woman's ceremony whereby she might get impregnated without a man. And that the reason for bringing a child into the world this way is that the child will bring certain gifts, very special gifts that that the village or the tribe are in need of.
Yes, and this is precisely the intuition that I received in doing the research, particularly in the ancient Mediterranean world, which extends into the Levant coast and Mary, that it was to bring in what I was calling an avatar, but basically a especially gifted individual who could help humanity rise back up after a period of deterioration, or move forward, or receive gifts, or get back to its original divine human blueprint, what have you. Okay.
Right.
So yes, so continuing about this Ojibwa story.
Yeah, and it of course it fell short of the actual ceremony, but I'm not sure. I mean, I don't have the book anymore. I tried to find it online. I couldn't find it, but I remember because I had already stumbled on Parthenogenesis, virgin conception, several years before that. Right now it's 50 years ago that when I first stumbled onto the topic of Parthenogenesis.
Was it initially through Lori, or you were already kind of
Already
onto it?
very onto it.
So see, here's another synchronicity. You were already onto it, right?
Right.
Then you meet Lori. You're in a similar community of breatharians for a while. All of a sudden, she is pregnant divinely. And then, you go through this whole story. You do all this research. Then you find my work. Then there are various people who started coming up to you and finding you and saying, I've had an unusual conception story. You research a little bit more. This connects us with M in Mexico, the recent story of M, who may well have divinely conceived. So you've been led, and even in your signs and synchronicities in your artwork in the other video, you've been led into this topic. So you're saying that this book existed. Do you recall the exact name of it? Did you?
I think it was just the Ojibwa.
The Ojibwa. Okay, so if anybody can find this rare book, let us know.
I would say published in 73 or 74.
Okay, and it talks about the process of a young girl being chosen to have a special being come into her, parthenogenetically.
Pretty much.
And then we know of the story of the peacemaker in the Iroquois, the Haudenosaunee Six Nation Confederacy, under the Mohawk and the Seneca and the Oneida and the Onondaga and the Tuscarora and the Cayuga, that this girl also divinely gave birth to the peacemaker. And then we have the story in the Chalagi or Cherokee people of the Pale One who came, also divinely born, that Venerable Dahani Yoahu writes about in her book, Voices of Our Ancestors, it's a very similar, parallel, if not overlapping story
Right.
as with the Haudenosaunee. And then there are other
And
stories
his
of that.
gifts, the peacemaker's gifts, he was an incredible negotiator and peacemaker.
Literally,
The
bringing
tribes,
peace.
right, had been fighting in New England area for centuries.
And in Canada.
Right, and
What is now Canada.
he
yeah.
developed this political system. It's a form of democracy, is what he developed. I mean, each village elected a representative that would represent their particular needs. And so they had all these different spokespeople that represented these different clans in villages, and they would all meet monthly. And then among the representatives, they would elect somebody that had a grasp of all the needs of the clans and tribes in that particular area. And so this person would, probably like a governor, would understand all the representatives' needs that represented all the clans and the people. So he would take that and go to these major councils, and that were like or yearly. I don't know the system exactly. I don't know. I'm not an expert on it, but
Right, and it also had a strong female leadership
Yes.
component,
Oh,
because these
absolutely.
were essentially matriarchal
Right.
cultures, which I want to talk to you about in a
Right.
minute. And I also want to say here that the peacemaker was able to bring together, with the assistance of Hiawatha or Hiawatha
Right.
and Jigonsase, the female leader, and his mother and his grandmother, eventually 6 nations that were really warring, that had really degenerated in their practices. They had come away from their original instructions, okay, from the star people. And because he exhibited characteristics of a miracle worker, in that which is what a divinely born child can do. He could be in a vessel, a canoe that would not sink. It was a stone canoe that would not sink. This may be star people technology and so forth, because he was a star being, essentially. The people believed him, right? So they saw the signs, right? Like with Jesus, bringing people back from the dead, healing people instantaneously. And the people said, wow, let's pay attention to this particular individual.
Right.
What are the teachings here? So it was a beautiful blending of star wisdom and practical know-how for people who were fighting each other deeply. So let's talk a little bit about some of the other highlights that you were finding in your research about divine birth. What are some of the things that stick in your mind? Maybe cultures or peoples or anecdotes or anything like that?
Well, I can say before my article, I mean, it was just amazing to have met this woman named Lori. It was a friend of hers that she became acquainted with Lori and knew what was going on and was very intrigued. And this friend was a mutual friend. I knew this woman who became friends with Lori beforehand, and she was like a sister. And she wrote to me. I don't think I had a phone. I was living in Oregon in the woods among American Indian people, and she said, Dennis, you got to meet this woman. She lives in Ashland, Oregon, and she has gone a year without any solid food. And I told her about you, that you studied regeneration and raw food and fasting at Hippocrates Health Institute in Boston. And if anyone could give you advice, she says, I couldn't, but maybe he could help you, in your decision that you're trying to make about continuing your fast. And so I did go to Ashland, Oregon, and I met her, and she had a copy of a book that was written by the co-founder of Hippocrates Institute. She had it with her.
Another synchronicity, right?
Right.
You know.
So I was able to, I mean, who am I to give anyone advice, especially somebody who's about to either go on with her fast or to break it? 6 feet 2 inches tall, 135 pounds. And he said, don't sound like much, but she was radiant with health. But she had some knee problems because she was working 3 or 4 months before she got injured. And so she was just dependent on a small amount of Medicaid and to help with her rent.
And so
Try to heal her knee, yeah.
fast forwarding to, you know, what so intrigued you about her, and let's zone in on the point at which you became aware that she was pregnant.
Yeah, well, as I got to know her, we would talk for like 6 hours straight, and I had to interrupt the conversation in order to eat something, so I had to go home.
Because you were eating
Yeah,
at the time.
And she would take grapes and put them in a blender and strain it so there was no pulp.
Mm-hmm.
And if she didn't strain it enough, she would regurgitate the pulp. I mean, that's
Because at this point, she was
Right.
pretty much living off prana, right?
Living off
water,
prana.
water and air and energy.
Yeah.
And so what happened, when did you find out that she was pregnant?
So,
Tell us a little
Right, yeah. I still have to paint a little more of the pictures. That
Okay.
we discussed Parthenogenesis. I couldn't believe that she had already read about it. It was the same book that I had read it from initially.
bit. The
and-
Ojibwa book.
No, it was the Hilton Hotema
Oh,
books.
the Hilton
Yeah.
Hotema. Okay, so tell us a little bit about Hilton Hotema
Right, yeah.
and what he said.
All the
because
research,
we
right.
referenced that in the gallery, the art gallery
Right.
video, but let's go into that right now.
Yeah.
Take a little detour.
It started
and then
with
get back
with
to
the Ankh, the Egyptian Ankh with the ovoid circle on top of the cross, and he explained how that's the yin-yang symbol of Egypt. And there's a lesson there, and there's a warning too: is do not separate the mother from the father, the masculine from the feminine.
Yeah.
Do not separate it.
Because that oval is the feminine,
Right.
and that is the worldwide archaeological symbol of the feminine, either the oval or the circle. And then the line is the symbol of the masculine in the archaeology. And then the
Exactly.
cross, though, seems like some kind of further iteration of that.
It does.
And then, obviously, Christianity took the oval off of the cross
Right.
and made a whole worldview out of the cross. And that's when we started moving even more strongly into patriarchy. But so that symbol of the Ankh, or the symbol of Venus, or the symbol of woman,
Right.
was originally represented what? Because
Yeah, he said
Hilton said,
he represented the original root race of, the original self-perpetuating root race of Eve.
self-perpetuating and parthenogenetic root race of Eve.
Right.
Okay, and this also is interesting because it reminds me of reading in Helena Blavatsky, the founder
Right.
of Theosophy. Her books, The Secret Doctrine, talk about different root races and different forms of the human being. And so what he was saying is basically there was an original race of women on the planet that could self-conceive. There was no male-female in it, and they just kept conceiving daughters.
Right.
And Eve, you know, as I see it and feel it, has been an African image, essentially, an African being.
Yeah.
And this being the, you know, one of the major origin places on the planet of humanity, even genetically, is shown to be Africa. And so we could say this was a parthenogenetic race of melanated women. That's what.
Right.
That's the term that Delbert Blair respectfully uses to say people of melanin, people whose skin is dark. It has dark pigment in order to be with the sun without burning, getting ill, and so forth. And so you're saying Lori had connected, she had read that book by Hilton Hotema too.
Right.
So she was onto this, really.
Right, and we discussed it just briefly.
Okay.
It wasn't like a goal that she
She didn't
had
say,
set.
hey, I'm
No.
gonna, yeah.
She was not even
She was
We
just
vaguely
aware.
talked about it. And we said, "Wow, that's possible." We thought it was possible. That was it. We never discussed it again. But after a year of fasting, I mean, after a month of fasting, after a week of fasting, if anyone has ever done it, the clarity one experiences, if you do it right, you have to prepare yourself. You can't just go from a meat, beer, cigarette diet into fasting, because all that stuff is going to go in your bloodstream and try to get out at once, and you're going to get migraines and headaches and mood disorders and, you name it. So you have to be careful about it, and she was. She had raised normally like any other American, and but she found out about vegetarianism, and so she got into that right away. And then raw vegetarianism, and then fruitarianism, and then juicing, and then she experimented with fasting, and then she turned it into a 40-day fast. She still felt really good. She was climbing like small mountains in the Ashland, Oregon area. And then she decided to just keep extending her fast. And she was working in a restaurant in Ashland for quite a while. Until, you're right.
So I want to point out the implications of this also. Because there was a preparation.
Right.
She was going naturally into the Garden of Eden eating, right? First of all. So purification, cleansing, moving into vegan vegetarianism, then moving into fruitarianism, and then moving into this other. So she trained herself to get off the addiction to food.
And one of the results was the diminishing of her menstruation.
Yes.
At first, and then it just disappeared.
And this in medical establishment is considered horrible,
right?
A disorder, something, and now they're giving women hormonal pills to rid the period. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about natural ways to not have that bleeding come out. And Delbert Blair, once again, in his amazing videos, if you want to look him up on YouTube, they are still up. He gives the woman lecture and various other things where he talks about that a precondition for parthenogenesis or virgin birth is the natural cessation of the period of the menstruation through diet.
And exercise.
Exercise and
purification. A lot of women athletes, they're on their own idea of what a specialized diet is, but what they're doing is calling on every resource possible in their body, to run in the Olympics or whatever.
Yes, and so here we get into the Amazons.
Right.
Those Amazon girls and women who did the foot races.
Right.
And this is where, the daughters of Eve and the Amazons and female nation start coming together, right? It's something that gets us, it retrains our animal body into something different. And this is not to denigrate menstruation, because it's been so long that it's taken us to even honor the fact that it's going on and not consider it something shameful. And Delbert Blair makes that point as well. He's not trying to shame menstruating women or say that it's better not to menstruate. He's just saying that, hey, if you want to go into this other thing, you can start looking into this and how this shifts the energies of your body.
Right.
And I also, Dan, want to look at the bigger implications of fruitarianism, vegetarianism, fruitarianism, and breatharianism, because what does that do? It removes us from the addiction to anything that's causing troubles on the planet right now, because all the strife is all about money, which is all about what? Being able to get your needs met, being able to get food ultimately, right? So if people somehow, not that I'm advocating, but I'm saying if people somehow lessened their need for food and lessened their need for certain types of foods, and then
alcohol and
and then lessened their need for food altogether and became able to live on prana, which is what some of these gurus do, and they're trying to show us this, that would change the game, but these forces have got it all whipped up that well, we've got to have food, so therefore we've now got to have money because we've got a monetary system. So the implications of this are very radical, even
They
just
are.
on the level of food, let alone parthenogenesis.
I know, they are.
So let's return to Lori, because I want us to then move into other discussions of matriarchy and your wide-ranging research and some of your views about men and women and what's going on here on the planet today, and how you're, one of the foremost feminist advocates on the planet, male or female or any gender. But return us to Lori, because what was the point at which
Yeah.
you became aware of what was going on with her
Well,
conception?
something I had, after meeting her in the spring of 1976, I got to know her for a couple of months. I'd visit her 2-3 times a week at her apartment. And we would talk for endless hours. But
And this was not a romantic relationship that you
no,
had with her.
absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I mean, we would do the obligatory hug, but that just felt awkward. It was only for a few seconds at a time. I never sat there and held her hand. I never kissed her.
Yeah.
There was none of that.
This was a
'cause-
spiritual friendship
right.
of a different
And
sort.
I was on a very, very frugal diet of vegetables and fruits myself. So I was celibate, which was the natural result of my diet. And I had a lot of energy. I was young. I was healthy.
Wow.
No alcohol, no drugs, no pot, no sex. Not that anything's wrong with any of those. As long as you can be a loving human being and be kind to yourself and others. Enjoy life, but be careful, watch the extremes, blah, blah, blah. But anyway,
which also brings to mind the idea, our foods, do they spur the excessive hormonal activity that leads to the excessive sexual activity,
Exactly.
that leads to the excessive reproductive activity?
It does.
That leads to global population crisis and, overuse of resources.
All right, not to mention rape.
Exactly, right? So, again, the implications here, very interesting, right? We've got to look at this all with balance, but just saying, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So you were saying that you would be with her in this spiritual conversation, and at some point she confessed to you in person, or was it through letters, or what?
About her being pregnant?
Yeah.
Oh, no. Well, I had a real tragedy happen. I had a very early marriage, and I was a father way before I should have been a father, but it happened, and I tried to be responsible as much as I could, but my ex at that point really wanted to live in California and have more of a hippie lifestyle. Anyway, so she was with our child, and he was 4.5, and I went and visited them that summer, and he drowned about 150 feet away from his mother and I. We were having just a very nice conversation, and we knew where he was, and we knew that he hated water, so we trusted him a little bit too long near this very sluggish river that was only like 2 feet deep, but that was enough. He slipped on this slimy log, obviously he climbed out on, and he drowned, but we didn't find his body till the next day. This is a horrifying story.
Yeah. Trauma
Anyway,
that deeply
so
has affected you your whole life. I know.
It really almost killed me, all the surrounding stuff that dealt with his death afterwards there in California, which I was out of place. I was just there temporarily. My home at the time was Oregon. And anyway, I couldn't continue my lifestyle there, so I came back to the East Coast to live with my parents. I was 26. I just turned 26, and I really needed therapy. I needed some help. There was no one I could find comfort in. My ex was already pregnant with another man,
Wow.
and she was happy.
Oh my goodness.
But she
Wow.
went through hell losing our child.
Yeah.
But she managed to have successfully she had her twins and stayed with this man for
Oh,
about
goodness.
20 years and raised her children.
And so
But
return
anyway,
us to Lori.
so Lori kept in touch with me through the grapevine. She heard what happened, and she kept calling me and would give me a rundown of her health, what was happening. She called me a number of times that, and she could see Justin in her meditations, my
This
son.
son, yeah.
And
Yeah,
she
wow.
assured me that he was all right, that he's sorry that it happened. It was an accident, and he knew that I loved him, and he loved me, and it was nobody's fault. And so that helped that she saw that. But then she called probably about a month later, 2 months later. She called between then, but this particular time that she called, she said that her breasts were mysteriously leaking milk, and that could I get in touch with Victor? He was one of the co-founders, Victoras Kalvinskis of Hippocrates Health Institute. That maybe because he witnessed many women's and many types of women, ages of women over the years in various states of health. So I called him up and I told him what was going on, and he assured me that it was probably okay. He had similar reports from different women about their breasts just mysteriously leaking milk. They just reached the point where their body was so nurtured, it was so healthy that they would have some natural leakage. Anyway, she didn't think much more of it. And then about another month passed, and it was so bizarre. It was Christmas Eve, 1976, around 10:30 at night. Christmas
Eve. And this is again, and this is written in her letters.
And she's not a Catholic. She was not
No.
raised with any particular religion.
Yeah.
It was just a very secular household. Her actual heritage, her mother was a Hungarian Jew,
Wow.
but been in America for several generations.
Yeah.
And her father was an Englishman. But they had divorced at the time, when she was a teenager. But anyway,
So it's Christmas Eve.
Christmas Eve, it was. My parents wanted me to join them to go to an aunt and uncle's and have Christmas Eve celebration. There's no way I wanted to celebrate. I was still mourning, very deeply mourning, grieving my son, death, And I didn't want to go out, so I stayed home, and I was taking a bath, and the phone rang, and it's 10:30, and I said, it's got to be Lori. No one else would call at this time of night. So I got out of the tub, and I answered the phone. Sure enough, she said, Dennis, I just had this experience with a blissful light. And it told me that I had conceived the child.
Wow.
What was I supposed to do with that?
Yeah.
And she wasn't even aware until months later when I had her go over the story with me, and so I could write it down, that it was Christmas Eve. She said, really?
Yeah.
I said, yeah.
Yeah.
And so about a month later, she calls again and said, I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to go to a clinic to see if I was pregnant. And indeed, she was verified by a gynecologist that she was pregnant, or just a doctor, in a pregnancy testing clinic.
And she had been completely celibate.
Completely celibate, absolutely. Still fasting. And the doctor said, I don't know what you're doing, but your blood is as pure and as free-flowing as a newborn baby's. This is what his quote was. He said, what is your state of, how do you, and she didn't say that she was a breatharian, and she didn't say that she was pregnant by a man or not.
Yeah. She didn't reveal anything.
Right, but he wanted her to go to see a colleague of his, probably about 800 miles away.
Yeah.
But this particular colleague of his loved analyzing women that were in different states of unusual health, and he thought he would really, probably finance her trip to go out there and,
Yeah.
and everything. Put her up in a hotel.
Let's just pause here because this is where my suspicion antennae go up. What was this really all about? What had they really identified? And was this a peering into something that should not have been peered into? Was this a trip that was actually for a different purpose?
Right.
Was this whoever operates underneath, the negative parts of the medical establishment rearing its head going, red alert, something not quite right here? Like free energy, whenever people do free energy, they suddenly get knocks on doors and things like that, right?
Yeah.
This is where I get suspicious in this story about what might have been done to her or what might have happened.
She battled within herself first, initially, even to get tested to begin with, to see if she said, "Oh God, what am I doing, testing the light?" But she just couldn't.
Well, you're a human being in
Right.
3D. We're not
Said,
in a place where we can
right.
handle the
Am
merging.
I pregnant, or was I imagining this conception experience with this blissful light?
Yeah.
Because she was in a state of ecstasy and had just come down from it when she called me. And then she was, before she got tested, she said, "Dennis, I don't know if I should test the light, or what." But she ended up doing it.
And she got, quote, a paid trip
And then
to go visit this
and then the
doctor
second
800
time,
miles away.
Right. And so she battled with herself about that, or whether I should go or not go, and I couldn't say yes or no. And then wow. About a month later, she calls me, and she's in one of the states in the Southwest, and she decided to go see this specialist in women's states of health. And she got verified again that she was pregnant. But he wanted her to stay to do further testing.
Testing.
Right. So that was a red flag for her. She said, "That's enough." She got scared. Said, "All right." And then instead of going back home, she calls me. She goes to a phone booth and she calls me after this appointment. She said, "I'm not going to stay here any longer. I've only been here a couple of days. I'm going to do what you suggested I do, or to take your place, because you wanted, at the time of my son's death, I was going to go visit the Hopi because I was fascinated by a prophecy that a true white brother would appear with knowledge of how to survive the cleansing of the Earth Mother, and that he would come from the rising sun. The original name of Hippocrates Health Institute was called Rising Sun Christianity, and it was based on the knowledge of the Dead Sea Scrolls that was interpreted by a Catholic monk, Jesuit monk of the highest order, that analyzed, got permission from the Vatican to study scrolls similar to the Dead Sea Scrolls, and he translated them from the Aramaic directly into English, and he unraveled the Catholic ceremonies. And oh God, it just, so the whole institute was, before it was Hippocrates Health Institute, was called Rising Sun Christianity.
So here we have this woman, just as you were going to go to the Hopi reservation.
Right. And I was going to bring, my idea was to bring knowledge of how to survive on wheatgrass juice and sprouts. You could store big barrels of alfalfa sprouts and mung bean sprouts and lentil sprouts, and you could grow sunflower greens and buckwheat lettuce greens in handfuls of soil, and then wheatgrass, which has 80% chlorophyll.
Yeah, which Del Blair
which
also says
under the
is
microscope
excellent for
it
people.
resembles human blood.
Yeah.
It's the closest, human blood is the liquid on Earth that resembles chlorophyll the most.
Wow.
Anyway,
so
I'm going to go to the Hopi is what I thought, and maybe I'm not going to say I am the true white brother. I am a true white brother, and I happen to have this knowledge. I mean, Victor's book is called Survival into the 21st Century.
This is Victor.
Victor Kalvinskis.
Okay, yes.
So I'm going to go to the Hopi, and I want to speak with the elders and say that, but my son drowned, and it just knocked me off of my little white horse.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
So I said, Lori, I'm so curious about this. You have the same knowledge that I do, because she grew wheatgrass, and it helped her heal her knee that she had hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so she's in Arizona, okay, calling me from a phone booth. Dennis, if you don't hear from me, I'm going to try to go see the Hopi and deliver this message about Hippocrates and survival into the 21st century.
So she was going to go.
Yeah, she was going to go. And so the true white sister was going to go.
Now pregnant.
Instead of the true white brother, is the true white sister's going to go.
All right. And so she's telling you this.
Yeah.
And did she go?
And then she said, if you don't hear from me for a while, that's what I'm going to do, So, a couple of weeks go by, and I'm wondering, God, what happened to her, There's no cell phones. She had like $10 in her pocket. And she started hitchhiking toward the Hopi reservation. And
she gets there.
She gets picked up by this guy, and he's really nice, and he said, I'll take you wherever you're going, don't worry. And she's holding, she had a jug of distilled water, and that was it. And said, are you okay? I mean, I'll take you as far as I can, blah, blah, blah. And he happened to have a flute, a silver flute in a box, in a case, in his back seat. And he said, look, I was going to, I don't need this flute. I was going to give it to somebody, I don't know. It's in my car. Why don't you just take it? So she took the flute and she pawned it. And she was able to buy more distilled water and to call me. And
so she got to the Hopi reservation?
So, but the thing that happened is she got picked up again by a farmer. And it was a good ride, several hundred miles. And the guy just dropped her off and said, well, you're basically on the Hopi reservation. And, I got to go. I got to go to work, and, good luck, and goodbye. So he went off to his farm, and there she is hitchhiking again. And this truckload of Indians that obviously had been drinking, this pickup truck, and they're hooting and hollering at her.
Oh, dear. White buffalo calf woman.
Yeah, so she's a little frightened. And then they go, and she keeps walking, and they turn around, around this corner, and they come back. And, and the same thing, they're hooting and hollering at her, and she just feels, I don't know what's going to happen. So they kept going, and they disappeared around a corner again, and that's when she went off the road.
Yeah.
And she was following no path, she told me. She wasn't following an arroyo or a cattle path or anything. There was no fences. She kept walking and walking and walking, and there was trees. And she saw this teepee, and she's just standing there looking at the teepee, I don't know, a couple hundred feet away, and this old man comes out with white hair, a Hopi, he had cloth around his head, and kept looking at her, and he was smiling, and he welcomed her, and he said, hello, little mother. I've been waiting for you for many years, and you're welcome to stay. And they had a long discussion right there, and he went into his lodge, and he said, you're welcome to stay, but I just know that now that you're here, in 7 days I'm going to die. I'm 104 years old. And 60 years before that, his wife had died that he was very, very close to. And he almost committed suicide, but he had a vision, a dream, to don't take your life, that little mother was going to come to him, and he was going to need
Unbelievable.
his knowledge about that she was going to be pregnant in the old way. And so she says, okay, but before I stay, I got to reach my friend, and he knew my name. Oh, you're going to go call Dennis? Go ahead. So he must...
Yeah, and let's just pause here for a
Right.
second, because this reminds me a little bit of the Peacemaker story, where Hiawatha had also had his whole family killed in this warring that had been going on with these
Wow.
nations.
Right.
And he was grieving, and he had to reach in. And really, I don't know all the details about it, but I do know that he was grieving, and he had to reach in, perhaps to stay alive after a grave tragedy like that.
Right.
And so it feels like there are these motifs. You, this Native American elder in the Hopi, Hiawatha, these repeating motifs, almost saying, yes, this is a path here you're on. These are your signs and significations.
Exactly.
You're on a path. So it's almost like out of a movie, and
It
yet
is.
I believe what you're saying to me. So what happens then with her at this reservation?
She calls me and she said, I'm going to be staying here, so just know that I'm safe, everything is okay. And then she called me again when she was back home, and she told me what had happened, and he did die 7 days later. They had a ceremony.
Wow. Whew.
Yeah, they burned his objects, his clothing, whatever was there, and they had a cremation, I think. I'm not sure if it was a burial, but anyway, but he told her he knew that she was pregnant by this ancient method. He said, now that I'm telling you all this, I can die. This is what I've been waiting for. And he said that her baby would be attached to her uterus as a source of light, and that she was not to eat. There would be a time that she would be told when to eat, and then that would begin the 9-month cycle, the physical cycle.
Wow.
So she had already been a year and a half or more of fasting at this time. And here she is pregnant, and this is what he told her, and he dies, and she goes back home. And
Yeah.
then what happened after that was like a couple of years I did not hear from her. I found out later that she had moved. She changed her phone number. I couldn't find her mother. I don't know. It was several years before I heard from her. And I got the rest of the story, is that she did deliver the baby. She was told when to start eating. She never gained any more weight, even though she started eating again. It was not easy to start eating again. She regurgitated a lot of her food until it settled. She got pregnant. It hardly showed. She delivered. The baby was premature. It was only 4.5 pounds, she told me. And then it died a few months later. So that's... I never saw her again. I wasn't there for the birth. I wasn't told about midwives. I don't know anything. I tried to get more story out of her, but I couldn't, because her baby had died, and it was probably about 2 years after the baby died when I finally contacted her by accident. I had started transcendental meditation, and it just came to me in a meditation I should try to find her father. And he lived in Los Angeles, and I went through the phone book in the library in Santa Fe, where I was at the time. And I just tried. I sent a postcard to what I thought logically might be him, and it was. And
Right.
So.
And you were connected, and Lori does not want to talk about any of this
No, she doesn't want to talk about it
publicly.
anymore.
So we respect her privacy, and we honor her. These are deep mysteries. There are other women on the planet who are and will say that they have conceived in this way. There's always mystery and questions surrounding it. Even I was reminding you that in the infancy gospel of James, which is the non-canonical story of Virgin Mary's life, at some point she has to take a drink test to prove that she's still a virgin. And this is typical of these tests in the ancient world. The Vestal virgins had to go through them, and Danae, when she tells her father that she's pregnant through virgin means, he thinks that she's just had intercourse with a man and throws her in a kind of a coffin with the baby. And that's another kind of test. Like, well, if they live, then they're divine, right?
Oh, gee.
And so Mary passes this drink test. We don't know what it is, if it's some kind of hallucinogen that's like a true serum, and anybody would tell the real truth under this, or what it is. She passes it. So we can never really truly pin these stories down. And this is the vibration that we are at on the planet right now. And again, the idea is not to replace sexual relating for conception, but rather showing there could be an alternative that might result, also if done consciously, in a different type of being coming in that could help the planet.
Right.
And so here's where I'd want to, just because we're almost out of time here, we're going to go a little bit more. Here's where I'd like us to have you talk a little bit more broadly about something to do with matriarchy, or what is your deep passion about this as a man? Or there have been numerous topics that we've touched on, and whenever we start talking about this, you unfold this kind of encyclopedic knowledge. And so where's your passion here? What would you, if you have 5 minutes left, what is it that you want to say to people?
The roots of all of our cultures are matriarchal. It's in the archaeological record. The effigies found in the earliest civilizations, cities that are under cities, are all of these female figurines. Occasionally there's a male figurine.
Yes, and you even reminded me that in Maria Gimbutas's book, The Language of the Goddess, she's a famous archaeologist who basically uncovered goddess veneration under the Bronze Age warfaring artifacts. She says that the parthenogenetic goddess, the self-conceiving goddess, is the primary motif of all of prehistory going back.
Very persistent in the record.
And
archaeological record.
And this does dovetail with everything I've studied through the very well-researched matriarchal studies movement, headed by Heide Gutne Abendroth in Germany. And she got many scholars and living people from matriarchal or matrifocal cultures from all over the world to come to a series of conferences, to publish books. And she herself had a couple of books on this topic published through the Peter Lang publishers. And yes, it is true, according to this research, that the original social structure was what we're calling matriarchal, which means that women were at the center, and they were societies of peace. It doesn't mean that it was the reverse of patriarchy, where women were abusers, even if there were times or places where some of that transition did happen. I mean, I have talked about that. But the healthy matriarchy, meaning mother from the beginning, mater arche, mother origin or mother beginning society, had men were supporting and helping to ground, and women were at the center, and the feminine ways of life were pervading religion, culture, politics, and economics. Okay, so these are well-documented societies, and this goes way back. And matriarchy is an answer to nuclear families. It's an answer to economic dislocation. It's an answer to the loneliness and fragmentation of our world, because the women would live, the families would live in communal matriarchal clans. In Native American parlance, the longhouses. And the marriages were incidental to it in the purest form. the sexual unions with men were for love, for procreation, at that later time, and then the man himself would go back to his own family. He wasn't primarily occupied with raising his children. He was primarily occupied with raising his sister's children, or the children in the tribe. So it was social fatherhood that was emphasized, not biological fatherhood.
Right.
And therefore, if a love relationship ended, there wasn't this dislocation. Oh my God, we've got to move now. Now we have half of an income. We're poor. We were even poor to begin with. And there's a flow because the whole village is still there taking care, and the locus and the well-being.
Especially,
the well-being of everyone is really wrapped in this matriarchal circle, So tell us, your sort of impressions about matriarchy as a man in 21st century who is very adamantly feminist, we might say.
We have, as men, we have everything to gain and nothing to lose if we become truly feminist. It includes men. Matriarchy includes men.
Yes, with very
they
clear
have
roles.
Equal rights, but it's not the same as patriarchy. We didn't evolve from matriarchy to patriarchy. We de-evolved when we did that, and we also created a perpetual state of war. It's war gods.
Yes.
And these were pacific cultures. There was no war. It doesn't say it wasn't perfect.
Yeah, and I think that word Pacific
Yeah.
really refers to the Pacific Ocean, which refers to Lemuria, which refers to Mu, which refers to Lemuria, the original continent as far back as we can remember on the planet, which was feminine in orientation.
Yeah. So, and you think about the first 3 months of human life. It's in the womb. It's a female. If it's going to be a male, the ovaries descend and become testicles.
Right.
And the clitoris elongates.
Yeah, I mean, it's all right there.
So men are, strictly biologically speaking, men are degenerate women. It doesn't mean that we're rotten people. It just means we're a degenerate female. I mean, the women have all the X chromosomes. We have some of them, but we have a lot of Ys. They're broken X chromosomes. So it's like, if you're going to be a warrior, then you want to know all your weak spots, right? So I can accept the fact, okay, I'm a degenerate woman. I have a lot of Y chromosomes. So I'm going to make up for that, by using my intense masculine energy for the good of the planet. And I'm going to protect my wife and my kids.
Through violence.
But I'm going to do it with all my strength. And I'm going to, like Gandhi, I'm going to use the power of my male fire for non-violence. But it's not a wussy thing. You have to use your power and your passion. I will not hit you. I will not strike you back. I will not stab or maim or rape or kill or steal.
Wow.
Unless I have to. No, I'm just kidding.
No. Now see, so this is a man who is healing his karma.
Yeah.
From lives, as a Jesuit, or, can you see it? Who can see it? Raise your hand. He said to me, it even looks like he's got the collar, and I'm like, this is your past life, Den. Yeah. This is why people become so adamant about the other side. It's it's when we have karma to clear and things to heal that we become really, really vociferous for the other side. And I know that in my own life, and perhaps that may be a thought that you're willing to consider. So we're closing the hour. Let's just find out if you have any concluding thoughts in this very interesting, flowing conversation that we've had. Any final thoughts?
Let's all be peacemakers, I guess.
Let's all be peacemakers.
And there is I'm really very serious about using our sword for nonviolence, because it's the most powerful thing we can do as men.
Yeah.
Is to turn the other cheek, but with power. You look your enemy in the eye and say, "You're my brother. I
Yeah.
will not kill you, I will not strike back.
Yeah. And this was, in fact, what the peacemaker did with Hiawatha and Jigonsase. They took the most difficult, hated, evil of their leaders, who was causing all of these troubles, and they enfolded him in.
Yes.
And they set very clear boundaries, and they gave him a choice he couldn't refuse, essentially. He could, but in that loving embrace, he transformed, and that's what it is about.
Right.
Right? And so
Yeah.
this is where we are today, in this time of the silent civil war, which is a civil war that's not only in the United States, but it's really all over. The silent civil war, as many of us have been discussing it. How can we create peace in our own families when there's this civil war division philosophically, and how can we create peace? So we will leave you with that. This is an ongoing question that all of us are having to dig deeply into ourselves for the answers about. And may we all be blessed in this. And Den, thank you so much for being
You bet.
somebody who has incarnated into this life as in a male body, with a real passion and a strong message to honor women, to restore some ancient mysteries that could be helpful, and for us to bring peace.
Beautiful.
Blessed be. Bye for now.